when we kind of line up with who we were created to be and how we were created to live, it just syncs up and it feels great. When we get outside of God's plan and his design, especially in relationships and how we're supposed to do relationships, we end up just damaging ourselves because we were created for a relationship.
You're listening to the Rise and Form podcast. Dave Teixeira.
Yeah, man, you got it.
Stoked to have you here. Thanks for coming in.
Me.
I'll share a little bit about how I know you, perhaps, but mostly that you're my pastor. And then through some amazing experiences, we became good friends. And so I just feel honored to be able to talk to you about this stuff and have you kind of in my setting, which is kind of cool.
I'm honored to be here.
Can we just start a little bit about you, your background, interests, and then we'll ask you our big question.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. I grew up an Air Force kid, so Air Force brat is what they call us. I don't know if I was a brat, but that's what we're called. So my dad's career military guy, which means we moved all over the U.S., just stateside, Abe. Sorry about that. No Australia. We were all over the U.S. So my growing up years were just like place to place, church to church, air base to air base. My kind of common thread everywhere I went was I was a sports kid. I just played sports, loved sports. And basketball was my main sport. My high school years, my sophomore year of high school, we moved to Omaha, Nebraska, middle of the country. And I went to high school there, did pretty well at basketball. And so I got a little scholarship to a tiny little college in the middle of Nebraska. Shout out to Hastings College. Let's go, Broncos. Yeah, man, it's kind of like small town America and small town basketball, but a lot of fun. Anyway, while in college, I was majoring in physics and math as my undergrad, and kind of had this idea that I'll just be an engineer. I was good at the sciences. I'll go be an engineer. I'll make good money. Seemed like a respectable career. I'm playing hoops. While I'm in college, I played all 4 years, but the affections of my heart shifted from sports to ministry.
Wow.
God just got a hold of me. I got involved in campus ministry and leadership and the church that I was a part of there and helping with the youth group. And my senior year of college, I'd been interning with this company. I got this job through a family friend, and this big chemical company offered me a job as a salesman. This is like October of my senior year of college. So I got a long weekend. I fly to New Jersey, interview. They offer me this job, pretty nice salary, company car. My dad's like, Yahtzee, you're taking that. That's a winner. And all I could think was, if I take this job, my soul will wither. And then I started thinking, well, is it because I really want to be an engineer? I started for the first time really thinking about being an engineer. And I'm studying physics and math, but I hadn't really thought about the actual job. And I'm already a senior, and I realized I had no desire to do that either. So then I started asking the question, this is a couple-month process, what do I want to do? Where's God? Where am I being called? And it was to ministry. And so it was too late to change my major. I just graduated, and then I looked for a youth pastor job, went off, got a youth pastor job in Minneapolis, Minnesota. A couple years into that, started going to seminary at night, and then over the next few years, got my MDiv from Bethel Sem. But that's kind of how I land here as a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
God just sort of U-turned my life during those years, and and then it's been kind of full speed ahead ever since.
Yeah, sports to scripture.
Guy can bowl.
Oh,
Yeah.
Used to be able to.
Come on.
My 17-year-old son just whooped me the other night.
Oh,
really?
I don't know, Andrea, he's real bouncy at 17, and I'm not as bouncy as I used to be. So,
oh, that's awesome. Well, let me ask you this question. What was a formative experience or moment in your life that's profoundly shaped who you are?
yeah, lots to choose from on this question for sure. But the one that sticks out to me, since I already talked kind of about vocation, I'll talk a little bit about more relationship stuff. It's when I decided to marry my wife, which sounds a little bit cliche, I have to admit. But Amy and I met my sophomore year in high school when I moved to Omaha. She was there. We started dating. We were friends for a while, started dating our senior year of high school, dated into college, our first 2 years of college. So a long, pretty committed relationship. And then after about 3 years of dating, we broke up. It started feeling like too much, and we were broken up for 2.5 years. Through the end of college, it was a small school. We went to the same college. that small college in the middle of Nebraska. So we saw each other a lot on campus and such, but we were not together. And then I went off to Minneapolis and kind of start my new life, and she wasn't there. We reconvened. One of my college roommates got married to one of her college roommates over Christmas in San Francisco. So a whole posse of us like gather together, fly to San Francisco to spend like 4 or 5 days in the Bay Area and watch our friends get married and be a part of this wedding.
Yeah.
And while we were there, I just connected with her, and we had spent a little time together. She tried to avoid me, but there's a small group of us, and everywhere she went, there I was, right? And so,
And you're big.
yeah, and I'm not a small man, Abe, right? Anyway, after a few sleepless nights, honestly, and thinking like, this is the woman. At the reception of the wedding, I approached her. After a very brief conversation, I told her that I loved her and wanted to marry her. And literally, we hadn't dated for 2.5 years. People thought I was a little bit crazy, but later this month, we'll celebrate 25 years married, and we have 3 kids. So, it worked out.
Wow.
Did you even know that story,
No,
Abe?
congratulations.
Yes,
Wow, 25 years.
25
man.
I also want to say, if my kids listen to this podcast, I do not recommend making major life decisions in that way.
Spirit of God was just on you. You were just like,
Totally. And of course, that has shaped and shifted my life
yeah.
massively.
Well, there's
Yeah.
probably no greater decision, one, to get
Yeah.
married or not, and
Yes,
then 2, who you
yeah.
select
Totally.
or who God selects or how that happens, however
Yeah.
that happens. Like just,
It is.
yeah, that was huge, and it checks out for you, and that's true.
No, I wouldn't advise it for
Yeah.
very many people at all. Actually.
No, I think that is big because, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but like when you're in marriage, it's like this iron sharpens iron kind of thing. It is discipleship in and of itself. It's a lot, And
You will grow, whether you
Well,
want to or not.
Yeah.
You will grow.
Yeah.
Mm,
And
it's
it's
good.
not always easy.
No.
But it's, we're supposed to, hopefully, as brothers and sisters in Christ, if we are, that we are trying to help shape and form each other to move towards Christ, even in our marriage. And it's hard because that person sees everything.
Yes, they do. Even more fun. Saw you in your underwear 2 days ago, and that's, you have to walk through that too.
Oh yeah, I got curious on that.
It'd be like Jamie sitting in on your counseling sessions and going, "That's great advice, Abe."
Oh man,
Yes. See, that's why we
I
don't
don't
let anyone
want-
else in the session.
I don't want
playing.
them to. Yeah,
Smart.
Yeah,
Smart.
That's exactly
That's why. That's why. Yeah, that's exactly why. Yeah. But this is good because what we really want to dig into is relationships, and I think one of the things Andrea and I were talking about before this was how it's probably the primary presentation for most people that come and see us, and a lot of mental health issues are either affected by relationship or relationships affecting it kind of can go either way. And so I think just us getting into this, just with your thoughts and experience and particularly, formatting this from a place of what God's foundation for relationship is. Maybe using Genesis, I like this word axiom as our axiom, or and there's some German word that escapes me now, but it's like the worldview from which we draw all of our understanding from. So we're not trying to think like this, we're trying to think from this axiom. So let's just start with, how are we meant to understand how to live and be healthy in this life if we don't have the original design to compare to? Where could we go wrong almost if we don't understand that foundational part that God has for what relationship was meant to be like?
Yeah, I think, we're all created for a purpose. Like and almost everything in the world is this way, right? I mean, you have a coffee mug over there, Andrea, and it was created to drink coffee from or to drink liquid from. When you're using it that way, it's like, it's working great. But if you decide, I'm going to split wood with that, right? I'm going to try and use that as like an axe. It's going to be devastating. It's going to absolutely be tragic for the wood, but mostly for the cup itself, right? So when we try to sort of use our lives in ways that we weren't intended for, it goes really wrong. And on the flip side, when we kind of line up with who we were created to be and how we were created to live, it just syncs up and it feels great. And so I think when we get outside of God's plan and his design, especially in relationships and how we're supposed to do relationships, we end up just damaging ourselves because we were created for a relationship. A lot of people like want to push against that. We'll talk about that, I'm sure. But also how we do it really matters. I mean, and it can really damage us.
I
That's
love
good.
that. I'm curious already. Like, let's get into that. Like, created for relationships, and what's that pushback that you're hearing? Because yeah, we are created for relationships. We see this so often. We see,
Yeah.
the struggles, and so yeah.
Yeah, we're talking about Genesis a little bit here today, and we'll kind of jump around here, through the first few chapters. But talk about where it goes wrong is right away when sin enters the picture, like when selfishness takes over, when all of a sudden it becomes about me instead of us, or my desires instead of God's plan. All of a sudden, the first thing that happens is hiding, right? Like we know the story in Genesis. It's like, hey, they're naked and they feel no shame, which for us is like, oh, is this like a nudist colony? What's going on here? No, not really. It just is about like, I feel so safe. I feel so secure. I feel so vulnerable. I feel so loved. I feel so accepted. I
Wow.
feel so much like everything is just right and safe and okay. And it's like all those emotions, they sometimes don't mean that much until you don't have them. Like when you feel safe, for example, you just take it for granted, don't you? Like at least I do.
Mm-hmm.
But then all of a sudden when you don't feel safe, all you want
You're
is
hiding.
safety.
Yeah.
Like, right? It's like same
Yeah.
with peace. Like most of us hopefully have peace a lot of time, but all of a sudden something goes down, something goes wrong
Yeah.
relationally or economically or financially or even physically, and that peace starts to go away. And it's all you can think about is how do I get it back, right? So that's what happens in Genesis, right?
Yeah.
They sin, it goes away, and it's tragic. And then
Yeah.
it says they hide, right? And we kind of have this like, Sunday school picture of how that all is. And now they're making fig leaf, underwear or whatever that looks like. But really, it goes much deeper than that. We're talking about like emotional, psychological stuff here, where it's like, I'm not safe anymore. I don't feel like I can be vulnerable. I don't feel like I can be authentic. And I have lost this sense of security that I was created to have. And all of a sudden, I'm trying to, split wood with the coffee cup again.
Yeah.
Well,
Ugh.
it's like I'm thinking about how I didn't know what a good relationship was. I had to learn that, over so much of my life. And now I try to teach that and also help people experience that. Like a lot of the work of a counselor is, let's try to make that happen in the room. And I think over time working with people, you're telling them about a place that they've never been a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting hearing you put it that way, that it's like there's this thing that we can have in a relationship, like profound love and safety and security. And if they haven't had it, they're like, I don't even know what that is. Like, I don't even know what that's like. If you're married and you're looking at your partner in the eyes and you're saying, I need you or something like that. I need to feel safe with you. I've never done that before. So I just love how you framed that, because I think that's exactly it. We're trying to understand what it is to be there back in the garden.
I mean, I think that's where the work is clinically, is like feeling safe, feeling vulnerable. People are coming into therapy because they don't feel safe, because they don't have fulfilling relationships and all that. And it's like, man, if we could just have pre-fall life, like we wouldn't have jobs.
PFL.
Yeah.
Pre-fall life.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I guess, we're trying to do ourselves out of a job, aren't we?
Yeah.
But
Well, and it's interesting. I mean, if you're talking about marriage for a second, because that's kind of where we were going a little bit, and this plays out in friendships too, for sure. Friendships, but we don't start we're not like Adam and Eve, right? We don't start in the garden with everything hunky dory, right? And all of a sudden we blow it in marriage, and now we're off the rails. Like we kind of want to think that's how it goes, but our story actually starts before then, and we've watched our parents, we've watched our friends, we've watched our friends' parents, we've watched other people's lives and marriage. We've already been trained before we ever get to the altar. I need to be careful. You might not be safe. This world is not a place for me to be vulnerable and real. I have to put on airs. I have to convince you that I'm good. I have to promote myself to you, right? I have to convince you that I'm smart and sexy and attractive and desirable all the time, because we're not just starting from this place where that's assumed anymore.
Yeah.
And so we have a lot of work to do even when marriage starts. And sometimes we're fooled into thinking that we are starting in the garden because of that honeymoon phase, of falling in love and all the hormones that are flowing through our minds and brains and like, man, this is perfect. And that stuff goes away pretty quick.
Oh, yeah.
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 For sure.
I got a thought, just this is again getting curious and taking us a little off script, but the importance of reflection, which is that, right? To reflect on where you've come from so that you know who you are and where you're going. You know, it's well researched. It's really important in psychology. That's why we do a lot of reflecting. But I'm wondering what you would say, Dave, about that, because that's sort of like a hallmark, a highly important concept, almost versus learning. Like, do we just need to learn, be educated on what a relationship is? Where would you talk about that? You know, I guess the importance of reflecting on it. How long do we spend in that place of reflection before we go, now I need to go to who I'm meant to be as a husband, as a friend, as a wife, as a mother, whatever it is. Does that make sense?
No, it does. And I think it goes back to what you said at the beginning, which I think is, I'm glad you guys are framing this conversation up this way. It's not something working towards, it's something we're working from, right? We're working from something. And so, yeah, we can all do behavior modification. And that's not always bad. It's got a bad rap in our day. Like, oh, that's just behavior modification. Well, sometimes we need behavior modification in order to get to heart modification or soul modification, like, or character modification. They work together in tandem. But we would all agree you can't just do behavior modification, and you can't do it forever. It is not sustainable.
Yeah.
If it is not who you are, it is not how you will be, not in the long term. So I think that going back to who am I, and not just who am I as a fact, because I mean, I think I would say, and you guys would agree, like, who I am as a fact is a man made in the image of God, a woman made in God's image. But who do I believe I am?
Yeah.
Because who I believe I am is how I'm going to act. And I think that's why Genesis is the best place to start, because we're going back to the origin story of humanity. The origin story of Israel. And it's ultimately, you know, as Moses writes this story, we get confused. We go to Genesis and we ask silly questions like, was it really 7 days? Like 7 literal days? 7 24-hour periods? Is it evolution? Is it young earth, old earth? We have all these questions about it. And Moses is writing this story to former slaves walking through the wilderness wondering, is God trustworthy? Does he have our back? Is he going to take care of us? When we come up against foes and challenges and difficulties and struggles, is he bigger than those challenges? Those are the questions we're asking, right? Like,
seriously,
who are we?
Yeah.
And whose are we? And who is our God? And why were we made? And Genesis 1 and 2 really get to the heart of that stuff. And when you understand it, that you were created good 7 times in the opening chapter of the Bible, it says it was good, it was good, it was good, it was good, it was good. And so many people walk around and they don't have any sense that they are good. He gets to humanity and he says, what? Very good. Oh man, you are very good. When you believe in like the core of your soul that you are very good, that the God of the universe, the creator of all things, says you are very good. That's a good place to start in any relationship. And I've been going for a while, but that's really important.
Yeah. I love that. I never thought about Genesis from that perspective, like Moses writing to, you know, the people that are the Israelites that are wandering. And so it's like, it does like give a different, it's like, yeah, who cares about how long the day was? Like, I am lost, you know? And he's like, look, like, so that, I like that. That is so relevant today.
Yeah.
That's what we need to know.
Well, and just to take it a step farther, these are people that came out of 400 years of slavery. They were told for 400 years, generation after generation, you're nothing, you're worthless, you're property. And now Moses is rewiring. That's not who you are. Let me tell you who you are. I mean, and that's a shift all of us need, really, no matter what our background is. On some level, we all come out of a place of pain and hurt and some brokenness.
And to believe that, I think just coming back to what you were saying, like, that's, how do you believe that? You know, like, that may require faith. Right. I just need to believe it. Like, there's so many things telling me that I'm not worthy, or that I'm bad, or that I'm not good, or that I'm not loved. So I guess I just need to believe that. And there's so much challenge to that.
Well, you think about how conflict and insult and damage, which if you get into a relationship because of the world we live in and sin, and we're all messed up a little bit, right? Like, I will hurt you eventually. You will hurt me eventually. That'll happen in any relationship. It's certainly in a marriage relationship.
Amen.
And if you're operating in a place where you are so insecure because your feelings about how unworthy or invaluable or how significant you are, if you're fragile there and then your spouse has a bad day or your coworker makes an offhand remark, it'll hurt you and then you'll respond out of hurt as opposed to operating out of a place of,
Mm.
I know who I am and I'm confident. So I can absorb
Yeah.
some of your insults, some of your, your struggle, some of your pain or sin or,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I can absorb it because of this confidence that's deep
Yeah.
inside of me. Again, it's back to what you said earlier. I'm living out of that place.
That's so good.
It's so funny. It makes me think about a parent-child relationship, and I was thinking about just this interaction with my daughter today, where she was hungry, she was tired, and she just turned into a whole different person in that moment. And my niece was with me, and I was being, very like just trying to be like understanding and kind of just talking her through things. And my niece was like, "You were so patient with her," and I was like, "Well, I know that the state that she was in, and it's my job to be able to contain some of that. So I can do that because I'm the adult. I'm confident in that." And it's like, I don't know, it just reminded me of that,
Oh,
of like, I can
man.
absorb that.
Yeah. And that's how
Mhm.
Yeah.
God is with us, right? So like in a
Yeah.
sense, we're trying to be a reflection of God.
Yeah.
My wife always
Yeah.
says the role of a parent, she got this quote from somewhere, so it's not hers necessarily, but she always says that a parent is someone who should always be the calmest person in the room. And so, which like, because kids will
Oh,
drive you crazy.
Oh my
man.
gosh. Yes. They push those
Yeah.
buttons. It's like,
Definitely have been the least calm person in the room many times.
Yes, yes.
Um,
Well, you have like a
yeah.
2-year-old, so that's acceptable.
Oh, yeah. I got so many thoughts on what you just said. I think maybe one that could segue us a little bit here is just about all of this is speaking to we're designed for relationship. And Dave, you might want to take it from here wherever you want to go with this, but because what I'm hearing even in your parent-child analogy is that if we know that we're designed for relationship, we don't see someone else as bad when they're not treating us right or when they're having a problem with us. We see it as our responsibility to be there for them, like God does. He doesn't go, "Come on, man, pick it up. What's wrong with you?" He's like, "Hey, you're my child." And so, and I think that's like, that's speaking to me right now. Like, I'm like thinking about that right now of like how many times I'm like, you better deal with that rather than I should be there for you in that. And so the thought of me hurting you, Dave, as you said, Abe, we might hurt each other. I thought, man, that's true. And that's going to need repair, right? And that's going to just need, of course, not just, of course, I'll hurt you, but of course I'll be there for you when I do, or when you hurt me, I won't abandon you in that.
Yeah, and I think part of that is it's what we see in Genesis. I think it's actually like at the core of Genesis 1. The very central message is this idea of God's image, that humanity is significant and special. All of creation is majestic. I mean, like, God created all of it. It's not a belittling of, the earth and the seas and the forests and the animals. Phenomenal. It's celebrated. But there's something about humanity that carries the image of God, that carries his capacities, his heartbeat, his divine sort of integrity. Like and we're supposed to be his representatives. That means like he's saying, I want you to represent me here on the earth. And part of that is like we talk a lot about self-esteem, right? And feeling good about yourself and operating out of that place. Part of that is just really coming to grips with, I'm an image bearer of God. But then the second part of that is, and so is that person.
mm-hmm.
So is that person. So is that other person. And I think when we really understand the depth of that person as an image bearer
Yeah.
of the Lord, it does change the way we approach them. It does give us patience. It does give us, kindness for people even when they're having a bad moment, because we understand that, hey, I'm not just valuable. They're valuable.
Yeah.
They're significant, worthy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
That's huge. Just they are an image bearer. So how am I treating them? If I am treating them like, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to overstep, but just this idea of like they're bearing the image of God. They're not God, but they're bearing that image. So I don't know, like, even like, would I treat God that way? Would that be like overstepping it?
well, it's probably a little strong, but I think
Yeah.
it's the right idea.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe even a better example is because your mom, right, is like, if you loved me, you wouldn't treat my kids badly,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They're not
Yeah.
me, but they are my heart,
Extension.
Oh,
right?
wow.
Like, They
Yeah.
are an extension of my soul in a sense, right? And every
Yeah.
parent gets
Okay.
that. And you even get that with your friends. I mean, before we kind of started the recording today, we were talking about, fun college stories. And
Yeah.
I remember one time this guy was picking on my roommate, just being kind of a jerk. And we almost came to blows because I was like, you can't treat my best buddy that way, right? I mean, again, was that the right response for me? No, but I mean, I was 19. Give me some
Right. Give you a pass.
Oh,
thanks.
We're not talking about when we were 19. Like,
Yeah, right.
But you're right. It's understanding value.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good to remember. It's hard. It is hard. And maybe that's something like, what are the things that get in the way of us treating people like image bearers? Like, what are the things we need to look out for? Maybe.
Yeah, and maybe Dave, it'd be good to hear your also personal experience there of what it's like to pastor people, walk with
Yeah.
people, what you've noticed about what does get in the way, what has been your experiences there. I'm sure it's vast and complex, but
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. But I think there's a couple things that come to mind, and one is just selfishness. I mean, just so much of relational pain is selfishness. And I read a pastor one time, I can't recall who it was, but who said like selflessness isn't like not thinking about self. It's thinking about selfless, right? I
Yeah.
don't think about myself all the time. And
Yeah.
and when don't I think about myself all the time?
Mm.
When I feel secure, right?
Mhm.
When I have you think about middle school. Why is
Oh,
middle
yeah.
school so brutal?
brutal.
It's brutal
Yep.
because every single one of those kids is in a phase of life. God bless them. Right? We just play a blessing over all the middle school
Yeah.
kids and middle schools out there right
Yeah,
now.
seriously.
They walk around, they're so worried about, what do I look like? What do people think of me? Am I smart enough? Am I good enough? Do people like me? They don't have any emotional capacity to care about anyone else, right? Now, hopefully, as we develop, and certainly as we walk with God and he gives us that security, now we have capacity because God's thinking about me. He's taking care of me. I'm secure in him. Now I can think about your security. And so I think selfishness is a huge part of what gets involved in relationships because people are thinking about themselves. And that sometimes goes back to the fact that they're operating out of a deficit and
Yeah.
both parties are operating out of a deficit. So now they're thinking about themselves. I also
Yeah.
think, and this will shift this a little bit, but I think it does have to do with expectations a little bit. We go into relationships, and part of this is good. Part of this is we were created for the Garden of Eden. Deep in our subconscious or deep in our souls, I think we all have this sense of how it should be. Like we know how the world should be. This is why we think injustice is so bad, because deep in our humanitarian subconscious is this sense that the world should be different. There should be justice. There should be fairness. There should be righteousness. And we have that same sense about relationship. And oftentimes we hope, we expect relationships to be a certain way. And sometimes that comes out of that vision that we carry. And people just don't live up.
Yeah.
And we don't live up. We don't live up to that. And it all goes, but it honestly should all point back to somewhere out there is a vision for how it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And part of the gospel is that Jesus comes to like make that vision a reality for us again now and then ultimately perfectly forever. And we can talk about that more. But in Genesis, like we have that original vision for it. And I think people, I just expect, when I got married, I expected my wife to just be like, I didn't ever even think this consciously, but in my mind,
Yeah.
this is how it was going to go.
Yep.
This way, this way, this way, this way. She's going to be perfect. And of course, she's not. And I certainly am not. And so
That's so good.
and that's like maybe the half of what people bring into a relationship. And certainly if you guys do marriage counseling, I'm sure you see that all the time. But even in like friendships that go wrong,
yeah.
it's like, I
Yeah.
expected this from you.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
right.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of people we see have trouble with that, and so do we. It's not like we've got it all perfect, but I think that's a good one. And I often talk about hope versus expectation. Like I hoped that you would come home and say, "How was your day, sweetheart?" And what does my wife say? "Why haven't you started dinner yet?"
I hoped that when I came home, dinner would be on the stove.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, okay. So we're both like getting it wrong here, and that causes huge issues, doesn't it? Stuff like that. And then that kind of leads into, like what what is our view? Like, what's our view of a relationship? I was going to ask just a follow up on that, Dave.
Yeah.
Because we talk about, then what do we do with expectation? If we're expecting that, are we meant to lower it? How do we align it? Where do we go? What's your thoughts on that? Like, what do we do when I'm expecting that, you're expecting this, and we're both letting each other down? Who folds? Like, what's the heart there? What has to change?
No, it's a great thing, because I think that, the world would say, like, either hold people to expectations or lower expectations. And maybe as Christians, we come at it a little differently. I think this is kind of part of, I thought we might talk about this more towards the end, but we'll get into it now. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Just how do we do this better? And the gospel gives us the way, right? It's like, it's living, and this is for all of life, but it applies wonderfully to relationship.
Yeah.
How do I live out of the gospel? How do I because a lot of times we think about the gospel and it's like, oh yeah, Jesus died on the cross and now my sins are forgiven and I get to go to heaven someday. So great. What are we doing tomorrow?
Mm-hmm.
Like, awesome. Like, what's the rest of the night look like? It's almost like they're disconnected completely. And yet the scriptures say, what Jesus says is, there's news, there's a reality available to you that will change every single aspect of your life in every single moment and every single relationship you're in. And then we have to kind of learn to put those lenses on. So if I see my life through the lens of the gospel, it's going to change my response. So let's go back to your question, Abe. I know I'd like to go big, long turn here. But if I start to see someone who's not meeting expectations through the lens of the gospel, I don't lower the expectations, but I have grace for when they're not met. And I'm able to sort of meet that while still calling them to be the person God longs for them to be, assuming my expectations are godly in this moment, right? To be the person that God wants them to be, but having grace for them in the moment. I'm leaving the shopping center one day and I'm running massively late. I think I had coffee with a friend. It went long. My wife was like, don't be late. You've been late taking your daughter to school like 4 times this week, or, and it's only day 3 of the week. I'm not sure how that even happened. It was one of those kind of days. And I'm already late and I'm stressing. And so I'm trying to turn left out of this parking lot onto a busy road, and I need to get across and go left, and there's traffic. And I'm just not getting out. I've already waited behind a guy and I'm like stressed. And right in the middle of my stress, this lady just throws on her like double flashers to stop the traffic and waves me in and like gets me in. And I pull in front of her and I'm just like, oh my, I mean, it's such a small little moment, right? She does it quick. I'm in front of her and we're going. But I am so like grateful. I mean, there's just, because I needed that. I mean, it was just one of those times like, man, I needed that. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, lady.
Yeah.
And the whole rest of the day, the whole rest of the week, you've never seen me be a more gracious, generous driver. I'm not a great driver. I'm a pastor. I don't put any Jesus paraphernalia on my car because I'm convinced that Jesus doesn't want to be associated with my driving. He wants nothing to do with that, right? But that week, I was like waving people in, patient, like, I mean, I was the kindest driver. And it all came out of the fact that I'm living out of the grace that I'd been given.
Yeah.
And now you apply that to, hey, you had walked away from God. You'd rebelled on God. You'd like entered into sin, and, you deserve punishment. You deserve justice. And God in his mercy gave his son. And now you're living out of grace that will wave you into traffic for eternity times a million. If we can live with that, now all of a sudden, the expectation that my wife, didn't have dinner on the stove or didn't parent the way I wanted her to, or we can get through it.
I think we'll be okay.
Right.
Right.
And again, those are trite examples. Some even more significant, like, when you really understand the magnitude of the gospel, now all of a sudden, my wife ran up our credit card bill by thousands of dollars by purchasing something I didn't want her to. She didn't do that, by the way. If she's listening to this podcast, I just want to be real clear. But if she does something real bad, right?
Yeah.
And you talk about people who come into your office and someone's had an affair.
Yeah.
Now, that's a whole other subject, but I will say, like, if people's hearts are open, both parties, God can do a healing work there. Why? Because the gospel is that huge. The grace of God is that enormous.
Wow.
And we just don't live like that. We want to take those glasses off when church is over, and we go back to like, I can't believe that jerk didn't, signal in front of me.
Yeah.
They're going 2
Yeah.
miles an hour under the speed limit and I'm in a hurry, so whatever.
Yeah, and that like sort of like even just back to selfishness,
Yeah.
because a lot of our heart in doing this podcast and doing the work we're doing is about, I want to become that lady. Like, I don't want to try and be that person one day,
Yes.
like I want that to come from me. I want that to be my formed self, that's what comes forward when that happens with my wife or whatever it is. And it's like, oh man, I'm still striving for that. Like, how long, what do we have to keep doing, to get there to that place? And it's like, just again, that just reminded me of even just you sharing that imparts that of like, yeah, that's right. That's the truth. Let's go back there again, to that place. Yeah.
And I think the current of this world is the drift away from that, right? Like now we're so tempted to think about sin, and we don't want to talk tons about sin tonight. We'll talk a little bit. We're thinking about it like, I didn't do this or I did do that. But really sin is like it's infected all of creation. It's almost like an infection that's running through our whole bodies.
Yeah.
And so when we just sort of sit there and don't do anything, it's moving forward. It's like a river. It's always moving.
Yeah.
So I think, you think, how do I become that person? We have to, the scriptures say, walk in step with the Spirit, right? But that's an active process. It's intentionally planting the truth of God, the truth of Genesis 1, the truth of who we are, the truth of who Jesus is and what he's done for us, constantly over and over again in us, reminding us who we are time and time and time and time again. And every time it goes about, an eighth of an inch farther down in. This is why Jesus says, every time you gather, do this, share this meal in remembrance of me. Just remember again, because we have to keep pushing it in. And as we do that, as we push it farther in, then we become. But it is not like, you can't like go to therapy and do 6 sessions and all of a sudden now I'm a new person. It's just not how it does.
I mean, Andrea's good.
If I did, I'd sprinkle some on myself.
I'm scheduling an appointment right after this. This would be great.
Thanks for listening to part 1 with Dave Teixeira. Next week, we're going to be wrapping up the season with part 2 with Dave Teixeira. We're also dropping an episode about Inside Out 2, where Andrea and I will give our thoughts and impressions of the movie. Just doing it for a little bit of fun, and hopefully it'll be something useful for you to listen to. So thanks for coming. We'll see you next week.